So, if you haven't read the Reading Research Quarterly article on testing, I would encourage you to stop viewing and read that before going through this part of the coursework this week. Before we get into the sample data sets for analysis and looking at, developing plans around those data sets, I wanted to go over just some of the basics on what the PSSA and actually Keystone assessment looks like, because then we're going to examine the reports that we get back, and it'll make more sense to just make sure everyone has the same understanding. So, what they've done in the state of Pennsylvania since um, they implemented the PA core standards is in grades 3 through 8, they have combined the reading and the writing portion of the assessment. So in the past, grades 3 through 8 did a reading assessment, and it was in the same book as math. And fifth and eighth grade took a separate writing assessment. And now students in grades 3 through 8 take all the reading and writing as part of an ELA assessment, and it's one book. It has its own testing window. It's the first week of testing. There were some changes made in the PSSA that I want to specifically talk about. I already mentioned the booklets. There are 4 sections, which means there are 4 days of English language arts assessment. And so all of them have reading. They have language, which language is incorporates really grammar, editing, spelling, conventions, and so forth. And then writing composition, where they're assessing the students' ability to write a narrative, opinion in grades 3, 4, and 5, or argument in grades 6, 7, 8, and then an informational or expository piece. So they are given one each year. So all the grades have this question that's what they call the evidence-based selective response, where there's typically, a part 1 and a part 2. It might ask, what based on, your reading, which statement best, is best supports the theme of the passage. And then, the second part will say, based on your answer in part 1, which 2 details support that theme. And so it's multiple choice, but the students have to answer 2 parts to a question, and sometimes there's more than one answer. And interestingly enough, that if you if the student gets part 2 right but part 1 wrong, they still get credit for it. But we'll talk about that another time. Grade 3 has a short answer question, and grades 4 through 8 have this new text-dependent analysis, which is really this, they call it the TDA. So we'll start using that in class if you're not familiar with it. It's really a literary essay, and we'll look at a few example questions in this PowerPoint. Which leads me to just a recommendation. There are parts of this presentation that I will go through quickly. You can pause and look at the screen longer if it's something you want to spend more time with, or you can print the slides and you can look at them on the printed slideshow. But for the sake of this, I want to move through quickly some of the examples. Here is the blueprint for the 3 through 8 language arts, and it's A is literature text, and A is important because we're going to be reporting and analyzing according to these categories. So you want to be thinking about, A is literature text, and that's related to the eligible content and the standards that you'll want to support teachers with as they look at things on the SAS, the Standard Aligned System, or in DRC, which was that CDT assessment. We'll look at an example shortly. You can see the 5 categories. So literature text, information, writing, which is the writing to a prompt in one of those three genres or modes. Language, which is that grammar, conventions, editing, usage. It's not just isolated to how it's being used. And then that E is that text-dependent analysis. And so what they will report on as kind of a subcategory then is this key ideas and details. So AK is all things related to key ideas and details. AC or BC is all things related to craft and structure and integration of knowledge and ideas. So BC basically would mean informational text, craft and structure, right? And all that good stuff. And the same thing for vocabulary, which is V. Here's just a reporting framework. And so in reading, you've got the two genres being assessed, and then within the reading, you have these competencies around key ideas and details, craft and structure, vocabulary. And then in writing, you have the writing mode as well as the language skills. In the Keystone exam, we're just looking at the reading portion of that. They don't do writing as a separate assessment in the high school, and they don't really do a text-dependent analysis. They do short constructed responses. So if I was looking at the eligible content in third grade as an example, all right, A, literature text. AK is key ideas and details. AK1 is demonstrate an understanding of key ideas and details in literature, right? So it's 1-1. And then there's 3 eligible content that are tested on the state test. So that's asking and answering questions, recounting poems, and how the central message is conveyed through the details in the text. And then this last one, describing the characters and how their actions contribute to the sequence of events. And so when you see these codes, there's meaning attached to that if you're not familiar with these anchors and eligible content. For the Keystone in the high school, it's a little different. It's LF, which is literature fiction, and you can see LF1 is reading for meaning. And so LF11 is using appropriate strategies to analyze author's purpose. And then within that, there are 3, just like we had in the AK. We had, 1, identify and analyze author's intended purpose. Explain, you can read all of these yourself, but you get the idea of how these are organized. So the reason I wanted to spend some time on that is if you are a school that gives the CDT exams, and some of you commented on that in that Google Doc in week 1, the teachers have a nice reporting feature. So here's an example of a third grade benchmark all the way down to the high school benchmark, and how the standards are really a progression, right? And so I believe this was a 5th grade class. I'm sorry, this was a 6th grade class, I believe, who, if you look across, you'll see here's the student names across the top. I believe this is the average, student response, number of items. Then you'll see here, this student, for example, sorry, this actually was a 3rd grade assessment. That's why the 3rd grade is shaded. You'll see the 3rd grade did well with the 4th grade standard in that particular one, but when it adapted and went to the 5th grade, they got it wrong. Here they got this AK11, this student got them wrong at 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. This student got it wrong at 4th and was asked a 6th grade question, probably based on the other responses being proficient, jumped up and got it incorrect. So you can start to look at your class and say, all right, how many in this class who took it, still need work in AK 111? And really, if you've read the article, you're asking yourself, well, is it because they don't know it, or are there other things that I need to be thinking about? Do I need to look at assessing that standard in a way that's different than a multiple choice item? And here, if you click on the actual eligible content, it actually gives you the definition of that eligible content. And if you click on materials and resources, it takes you to the SAS site. And if you click on sample item, it'll show you the type of question that would be asked. So you could see this potentially could be a useful tool, kind of connecting with what you did last week in the classroom data project. This could be a useful tool in getting a teacher to kind of, coach them on how they could adapt their instruction based on their student responses. Here's a sample third grade item, and I'm going to go through this quickly because of the time. You can pause and look at this. I've accounted for that in the time for this week's activity. Here you can just see overall the number of passages and points for grade 3 and in the number of passages and points in grades 4 through 8. And this would be helpful for a teacher to know, just how many multiple choice items are my students going to need to answer for reading. The standalone 18 is the writing assessment where they get at grammar and language skills. And then these evidence-based selected responses. And then the short answer items, that's essay. And here they change the essay to the TDA. So you can look at that breakdown. Here you can see the breakout, short answer and text-dependent analysis. Typically the short answer is 1 page, and it may include multiple steps, but students are typically providing some type of brief explanation and being scored on a 0 to 3 point scoring guide. Here's just an example of the directions, and one of the reasons why I wanted you to have read that article previously. Just look at this, the third bullet from the bottom. For example, if the question asks you to explain, be sure to explain. So that's what a third grade direction looks like for students. So you can imagine all the wording that they're going to see on a state test. And so when they don't do well, you have to ask yourself, was it the question or the thinking, or did the students, are there other factors contributing towards student success? Here's just an example of the scoring guidelines. Again, all these you can print right from PDE or, stop and pause. Here's a sample short answer question for a third grader, both literature and nonfiction. And the writing prompt, again, you can see the directions and they get a checklist. And here's a sample opinion question for a student. Not too hard, but so it's definitely in the student's zone of understanding. And you can see here, this is grade 6, they move into argument, and grade 7. Here's the scoring rubric for that, and you can see to get a 4, you need to meet all these criteria. In our district, we actually went ahead and created a checklist for them, and I'll show you that in a second. Here's the passage sample for a grade 6 TDA, where they have to use evidence from 2 different passages to support similar themes. They're scored holistically, so they don't get a point for each thing that they do. Again, here's the scoring rubric. The kids see that's a 4, 3, 2, 1. We turned it into like a checklist so that the students could, really go through and say, well, have I done this? And what does that look like? And then here, there's just a bunch of examples of evidence-based response, language, multiple choice, and you can see here it's about usage. The format for grade 3, I'm going to pause here and have you stop and take time to look at the rest of the questions. I'm going to start part 2 with just going over an overview of the points to this.